Hello, my dears. I'm back with you once more, this time with freshly waxed moustache, or mustache, as Americans call it, for a few more thoughts about Brecht. It was certainly vainglorious to imagine that I could treat of the works of Bertolt Brecht in 15 minutes. And yet I don't want to go back over the territory I've marked out. I should, I suppose, call him Brecht. I hate to hear him called that, even though that's true to his Swabian birth. But I myself, brought up in High Prussian fashion, say Brecht. So I hope you'll settle for that. Bertolt, or Eugen as he was known as a child because it's his first name, Bert is a fascinating case of the issue of the great man theory of history. And I had two very good friends, one of whom spent his school days studying Napoleon, the other of whom spent his school days studying the second passing of the Reform Act of 1834, the Corn Laws. And these were two versions of history, of course. Now, the problem with theatre, as with any institution, and theatre ultimately, unless it's a kind of catch-up game of ball, one of those, okay, I'll have you, you go with him, and it's just a casual improvisatory event, is an institution. There's no way around that. And the survival of institutions is of concern, certainly to old codgers like me, who have quite a long time in which to contemplate the evolution of history, of the history of their times, cultural history, and what is, alas, all too clear to hopeful souls, Marxists and the like, among which you may count me, is that institutions do not much outlive their founders, their inspiring figures. It's always thought that once the great man or the great woman dies, it's possible to deduce from their contribution, if not actually to deduce from their writings and from the people who worked with them, how the institution that he or she founded or enlivened or motivated could be continued in the same vein. Not that really the great man/woman would necessarily want the institution to have continued in the same vein. Most brilliant founders of institutions understand above all things how society shifts and changes and creates different needs. It's not that there's any less need, I would think, today for revolution, for class revolution, gender and race revolution. In fact, if anything, more so. But a Bertolt Brecht, alive now, having died prematurely in his late 50s, would look around perhaps and prescribe something different from what he prescribed at the time, which grew out of a doctrinaire Marxist view, which had to be interpreted in the language of theatre. And as I said at the end of the last little video, theatre can't be a lecture. It just won't work that way. Brecht knew this extremely well from his early work in the 20s, from plays like Baal, which were wonderful vehicles for huge, monstrous, brilliant actors. He knew very clearly that it would take individuals to animate a theatre and bring the theory that underlay it to people's attention. Without that, the only theory, no theatre. And one of the two or three greatest actors I saw in my whole life was Brecht's son-in-law, Eckhard Schaal. I don't know if he's much remembered now. He was booed on the wall when it came down, the Berlin Wall. He read some of Brecht's doctrinaire communist poems and was booed by right-wing students. I don't know if Schaal is remembered. His great performances may not have been filmed because he performed just before the age when all remarkable theatre productions were filmed. and so a good deal of unremarkable ones too. So I'm not sure what kind of a record we have of him, but on stage he was a titanic force, a tiny man, but one who enacted his father-in-law's vision faithfully and brilliantly, which is the potential contradiction inside Brecht's theory. He was not he stood outside the action and yet acted within it. I saw him play Coriolanus. I saw him play Hitler, as it were, in the Irresistible Rise of Arturo Ui. I saw him do many parts, and he was absolutely magnetic in all of them. A magnetic quality which cannot be explained by Marxism. It has to be said. It would be nice if it could. But people are not exactly born geniuses of this kind, but they have slumbering in them a fuse to which something in their early years sets light, and which can then never be quenched. So here is Brecht doing his best to create a theatre with a momentum that carries it inexorably in the Marxist direction, in the direction of awareness of the inequalities of our society that we should not be putting up with. At the same time, he's caught up in an industry, the theatre, that is an entertainment. And without entertainment, it will not survive on noble thoughts alone. So Brecht, as it turned out, was brilliant at writing entertaining characters. He spent a lot of his writing life rewriting other people's work. He said that was the real challenge. There was no challenge in thinking up your own story. The thing was to find somebody else's story and turn it around and twist it around, which actually fits rather well with the world of his theory, restating what had been stated as a sentimental proposition. Brecht would have called Antigone a sentimental proposition, because you might come out weeping for all those characters, in which case you would have exhausted your own revolutionary potential, which Brecht was very concerned that you should not do. So it seems like a noble project, whether you're a Marxist or a virulent anti-Marxist, whatever that is, anti-socialist, you might still acknowledge that the project of inciting the audience to stand up outside the theatre and rebel against the inequities, the inequalities of the society in which we live. You might or might not think that was a noble project. You might be an unregenerate fascist and be saying, no, let's not have any of this nonsense. People are who they are. The big dogs eat first, and the smaller dogs eat second, and the tiny dogs maybe don't get to eat at all. And that's society. We are an animal, and the jungle that is human society is a natural evolution. And there's certainly an argument to be made for that. As a Marxist myself, I totally see that argument and would love to be invited to make it. It's an argument of joy and despair at the same time. Despair in a hopeful future, a kindly future, a reasonable, modest future, and joy in the sheer violence and cut and thrust of may the best man win, or woman. However, all my life I have been shocked and thrown out of kilter by exploitation, the exploitation of women and the exploitation of race, which brought me eventually to the opportunity, which I would not have had I not joined the Communist Party, not in America, the opportunity to put my life on the line for the equality of the races in South Africa. So I've been a happy fighter on that side of the great issues of our time. But I see unerringly the argument for utter, ruthless dismissal of all mealy-mouthed concerns for the well-being of the less well-off. I see the power of that. I see the strength of it. I see the force of it in our evolution as creatures. We're not here because our ancestors were nice. We're here because our ancestors were quicker on the draw to kill the weak. That's the fact of it, my fellow friends. Does it mean we always have to go on like that? No, it doesn't. But the business of hitting the brakes on the gigantic multi-carriage train of our evolution is very hard. We've had the brakes on for a few centuries now, and we're slowing up but still going in the direction of ruthlessness. In fact, there's been a little revival of ruthlessness in recent times. However, I remain on the ever hopeful, mealy-mouthed liberal side of the blanket, and interested in the problems that Brecht encountered in promoting this side of the blanket in theatre. It worked well enough in his lifetime, and for a few decades afterwards, while his widow Helena Weigel was at the helm of the Berliner Ensemble, the theatre that Brecht founded in what was then East Berlin and is now just Berlin, and that theatre still stands and is accessible and does productions, most of which are perfectly terrible. Theatres do not endure. The buildings might, although few do. But the quality of work does not endure. And maybe that's a beautiful thing about theatre. It has to be completely rethought, rekindled, and has not been in the case of Brecht's theatre, but it was for 20 years. She created wonderful and celebrated performances, as did Brecht's son-in-law, her son-in-law indeed, Eckhard Schaar. So for a time, by sheer force of personality, the very thing that Brecht's theatre is dedicated to subjugating, they kept Brecht's theatre alive. The point, of course, was not personality, and that's why his acting instructions were all about not caring so much about whether the actor completely identified with the grandmother who was knocked over by the car, saying, I don't care whether the person telling you the story inhabited the grandmother so convincingly that you were in tears before he conjured up the car to knock her down. Brecht is saying, no, never mind all that, don't be silly, we don't care about that. We care about what happened. It's a theatre of action, inviting us to share in it, to provide our own action, provide our own solution, to step out of the theatre and push the exploiters in front of the car that are coming round the corner, not the old grandmothers, not the weak old grandmothers who are exploited by bourgeois laws. So he did his best, and his theatre survived for longer than it might had it simply been a doctrinaire Marxist artifact. And yet now, I fear it's fading. I don't see his name so much cropping up in the lists of theatre productions, even in Germany, and not at all in Britain or America. So it may be that his race has been run, or it may simply be that his race will come again, and this is a lull in the story of the evolution of theatre and the idea of theatre. So thank you once more for putting up with me as I add this footnote to my Brechtian thinking, and may we all meet one day at a performance of The Good Woman of Szechuan, or one of Brecht's truly wonderful plays, because he was a great writer. Stay well, keep warm, be happy, and I will see you soon. Bye.